So now we're going to be looking at our intervals and orientating the intervals around this G note. So as we do that, we'll be looking at the same shape we looked at in prior presentations. However, we're going to be basically thinking of ourselves in the Mixolydian mode as we center ourselves around this G note. So we're just changing the perspective around the same shape, this different focal point around the same shape. So let's just do a quick recap in order to orientate ourselves on what we're doing. Remembering we started with the major scale or Ionian mode, same shape. So we have the same shape on the fretboard because we have the major scale or Ionian mode and all the related modes to them, which basically just mean that we're going to use a different starting point, a different focal point, a different tonic. So when we're up here, we chose to start on shape number 5 because that's possibly the most well-known, shape on the guitar. If you play it from A to A pentatonic 5 notes, it's going to sound like that. If you add the 2 extra notes, it's going to sound like that if you're going from A to A, which is often how many people learn it if you're learning it from this position, because that's kind of where it starts. But you could start it on a C, going from C to C, then you would be basically playing a major scale. If you went from D to D, you'd be playing the Dorian scale, and so on and so forth. We can learn this shape multiple different ways from multiple different perspectives. The 3 major ways would be we actually just memorize the shape. So I could just memorize this shape and say, well, I know that shape represents the C major scale and related modes, and then I can shift it up and down for other major scales and related modes. Or I can basically use my formula of whole, half steps and so on from each point, noting that formula will then change depending on our starting point. We typically learn first from the major position, and then we can adjust the formula as we start from a different position. And then we can also learn it from intervals around the focal point, the root or tonic, which if it was the C major, we would be looking at every note as it compares to this tonic. And then if I go to the next shape down, the D, then I can recreate this same shape, but now measure everything as it's compared to the D note, which means we basically be playing Dorian. From a practical standpoint, what does this do for us? It allows us to see the notes in a shape basic format for the major scale and the related modes. And if I know the major scale, most people start to memorize what they can then do in terms of chord creation, meaning can I convert these notes into a major or minor chord. We start to memorize that the 1, 4, 5 convert into major chords, meaning they have a major third. The 2, 3, and 6 can be converted into minor chords, have a minor third, and the 7th is the Locrian, has that flat 5th in it. So that's really helpful for chord creations and building songs and whatnot. But we can also, if I go to the Dorian mode, for example, it gets a little bit more confusing. I know the notes are all the same, but I might not be able to pull up which relative position builds a major or minor chord if I make the 2 note now the 1 note. And that's why one reason it's useful to compare everything to the C scale, because that's often people's point of reference. So therefore, I'm going to number the modes based on the C major scale. So I'm going to call this mode number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Those are going to be an absolute numbering system from the perspective of the major scale. That means that if I'm on the Dorian mode and I can code switch in my mind and say, well, the Dorian mode means that it's mode number 2, and mode number 2 means that from the perspective of the related major, it's the second note. I then know that I'm going to make it at least builds a minor chord, because I know that the 2, 3, and 6 related to the major scale are ones we build a minor chord from. So that helps us possibly a little bit to kind of identify, should I build a major or minor triad as we go to basically different modes. So that's going to be the general idea. Now also remember that the triad is only 3 notes. So if I build past 3 notes in terms of a chord construction, then the question is, does it still fit in the same key or not? And in order to know that, we basically kind of have to know the full modes and the differentiation between the modes, which is another thing that this exercise will basically work us on doing. So the general idea would be that I would like to know the intervals for the major scale, and then possibly the intervals for the related minor scale, and then all the other modes are going to be one interval difference from the related major or minor scale. So that's going to be the idea now. So now we're on a Mixolydian mode, which is from a mode, if I name the modes based on the relationship to the major scale, it's the 4, right? Because it's the 1, 4, 5. That means I know it's a major mode because the fourth note in a major scale constructs a major chord. And if it constructs a major chord, it's also a major mode, both being defined by the fact that it has a major third as opposed to a minor third. So we're going to say, all right, it's a major mode, and that means there should only be one interval difference between the Mixolydian mode and the major scale. So I can easily convert between a major scale and a Mixolydian if I know what that interval is, and I can just shift that interval, which is one way that I can adjust my shape over here, right? I can look at my shape and say, I know this shape one way, maybe in Mixolydian, right? And then I can convert it to G major by basically just shifting that interval. So, and on the Mixolydian, it happens to be the 7th, which is really important a lot in American music, because American music often has the flavor of the flat 7 as it's kind of one of its defining characteristics, at least in my opinion. So that means this is a really, popular mode because it's kind of like a bluesy type of mode. It gives you that tensiony sound with the flat 7. So let's go over the major scale intervals, and then we'll go over the Mixolydian intervals. So we've got the major scale has the perfect first. They all have a perfect first. 2 note away major second. This 2 represents the second note in the scale. This 2 represents that it's 2 notes away in half steps. The third is a 3 note away major third. The fourth is a 4 note away perfect fourth. Remembering that the perfects are usually still perfects even on the minors, unless there's an exception given the mode. We have the fifth is a 7 note away perfect fifth. The 6th is a 9 note away major 6th, and the 7th is an 11 note away major 7. Let's compare that to where we are now, Mixolydian, where now the shape is the same colored notes. We're still going to stay away from those white notes. We're going to stay away from those ones, man. But unless we want to add a little bit more color into it, a little bit more flavor, and into the scale that we're in. But we'll talk a lot about that later. So on the Mixolydian, we're now making what was the 5. I'm going to call it mode number 5 because it's relative 5 position to the major scale. And I'm going to say that then it has a perfect first, which is now a G, a 2 note away major second, which is the same distance, but now from the G as opposed to from the C, has a 4 note away major third. That's what we would expect in a major mode, as we know it is, because the Mixolydian is the 4 note of the related major scale, and the major third, or the third in general, is the defining factor between a major and minor. We've got a 5 note away perfect fourth, which is the same typically for most major and minor constructions. We've got a 7 note away perfect fifth, which is again the same generally for both. Hopefully I said 5 note away perfect fourth, and then a 7 note away perfect fifth, and then we have a 9 note away major 6. And then finally, we have the distinguishing interval. So this is the only thing that's different between the Mixolydian mode and the major or Ionian mode. And that's going to be a 10 note away minor 7. So this interval is really an important interval to note then, because the minor 7 is there, a 10 note away minor 7 as opposed to an 11 note away major 7 is actually kind of more common through all the modes, because it's there on all the minor modes, right? Well, is it more common? Yeah, I think it's there for all the minor modes, and the Mixolydian mode has a minor 7. So that's what makes the Mixolydian a little bit closer than to a minor mode in that way, because it has that distinctive minor 7. That also means it doesn't have that half step going home. So that leads to a couple things, because whenever I'm in a minor mode, one thing you can always do is add that half step in to give you a leading tone home. So this one, doesn't have that. It's got that minor 7, which is cool, but then you can always add the leading tone if you're going home, and that's one distinctive factor that you can kind of put into it. And then so that's just, and then of course you also have the fact that it has a minor third. It has a major third, but you can kind of play with that and make it a minor third, going back and forth between the major and the minor, and that's kind of like the blues note for it as well, so that you can play around with that. But in any case, let's go in, and now we're going to measure around this G here.